ever felt like you're walking a tightrope every single day of your life? Like modern society demands that you be a strong provider, a decisive leader, the guy who steps up when everything hits the fan. But then the absolute second you actually show authority or take command, you're penalized for it. You get pulled into an HR meeting or sat down by a partner and you get lectured about, toxic masculinity.
Right. It's a completely mixed message.
Exactly. You are constantly told by the culture at large to open up, be vulnerable, share your feelings. But I bet you've noticed that the moment you actually do that, you watch the respect literally drain from the room. Suddenly your promotion goes to someone else, your relationships get rocky, and you're left completely stranded wondering what the actual rules to this game even are anymore.
It's a trap, essentially.
It is. And if you're a man trying to navigate a modern world that seems to be sending you entirely contradictory, almost schizophrenic messages, I want to tell you right now, you are not crazy, and you are not alone in noticing this. Today's deep dive is tailor-made precisely for you. We are talking directly to the rational, red-pilled man who is looking to pull back the curtain and understand exactly how modern institutions operate. We're going to specifically look at the claim that these institutions have been systematically captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies over the last few decades.
And more importantly, looking at how you can actually win in a system that feels completely and utterly rigged against you.
Yes, exactly. But before we jump into the deep end, I want to remind you to hit that like button and subscribe to the show so you never miss a deep dive. And I am telling you right now, you are going to want to get your hands on the source material for this one. We are reviewing a highly provocative ebook today, and I urge you to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy it for yourself. Also, make sure to follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack. The book is called Political Science: Understanding Politics and Personal Power.
It's quite a read. Our mission for this deep dive is to unpack Riker's controversial, entirely unapologetic manual for personal dominance and institutional conquest. He is laying out what he calls a mechanical blueprint for power, drawing on ancient history, evolutionary biology, corporate strategy.
Covers a lot of ground.
He really does. Now, before we go any further, I need to be explicitly clear with you, our listener. The sources we are discussing today contain highly politically charged content. We are going to be exploring perspectives that aggressively challenge modern progressive narratives, both left-wing and right-wing. We, as your hosts, will never take sides. We are not endorsing Riker's viewpoints, his political ideologies, or his social commentary.
Right. We're just the messengers today.
Precisely. Our job here is strictly to impartially report on the mechanics, the historical patterns, and the specific strategies the author presents. We're acting as neutral guides to the source material, breaking down his arguments so you can evaluate these frameworks for yourself.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because Riker starts by essentially ripping the Band-Aid right off in the very first chapter. He introduces what he calls the immutable laws of biology. His central thesis seems to be that biology is not bigotry, it is an operational reality. He argues that men and women are fundamentally, neurologically, and hormonally wired for entirely different roles.
And he claims that pretending otherwise is exactly why modern society feels so incredibly chaotic right now.
Right. But what exactly is he pointing to when he says we are wired differently? Like, what is the baseline he's establishing here?
The baseline relies heavily on anthropological data. He looks back at hunter-gatherer societies to explain our modern neurological wiring. Riker's argument is that you cannot understand the modern boardroom or the political arena without understanding the savannah. He argues that men are biologically wired for risk, for spatial mapping, aggressive resource acquisition, and civilization building.
And women.
He states women are wired for nurturing, threat detection, and maintaining social cohesion within the community.
I know he brings up a few specific tribes to illustrate this, like the Kungsan tribes in Namibia and the Hadza tribe in Tanzania. From what I read, he describes these male hunting parties in incredible detail. They're tracking prey like a kudu antelope for days on end, navigating through 100-degree heat across miles and miles of unforgiving savanna.
The Hadza example is particularly striking in his data. In that tribe, the men are responsible for bringing in roughly 90% of the high-calorie meat that sustains the group. Doing that requires a very specific set of skills. They have to coordinate complex spear hunting strategies, calculate risk instantly, and execute those strategies without a moment of hesitation.
Because if they don't, people die.
Exactly. If they fail, or if they stop to debate their feelings about the hunt, the entire tribe starves. Riker argues that this isn't just an interesting history lesson. This is caloric economics. It is a survival mechanism that, over millennia, physically shaped male neurology to thrive in strict, hierarchical, goal-oriented teams.
Let me play devil's advocate here for a second, though. Couldn't you argue that this is just a cultural adaptation to a specific environment? I mean, tracking an antelope is a very different scenario than trying to close a software deal in a climate controlled office building. Does he actually have proof that this ancient wiring still dictates how we act today under pressure?
That is exactly the pushback you would expect, and he anticipates it. He connects this ancient wiring directly to modern crises to prove his point. He looks at extreme, life or death situations where cultural conditioning is stripped away and we are forced to default to our biological baseline. The prime example he uses is the 2010 Chilean mine collapse.
Oh, right, the 33 men trapped underground.
Yes, 33 men trapped 700 meters underground. What happened in that dark, confined space? Riker points out that they didn't form a vulnerability circle. They didn't try to build a consensus-based democracy where everyone's feelings were validated. The moment the crisis hit, they instantly and naturally deferred to a strict, rigid hierarchy under their shift foreman, Luis Urzua.
And he just took over.
Completely. Urzua immediately took command. He rationed their incredibly limited food supply down to 2 spoonfuls of tuna every 48 hours. He enforced strict working and sleeping shifts to maintain discipline and sanity. Riker argues that this biological default to a male hierarchical command structure under existential pressure is precisely what resulted in their survival for 69 days.
That is an intense example, but what happens when you try to engineer that natural hierarchy out of the equation? Does he have data on what happens when modern institutions try to override that biological response?
He does, and what's fascinating here is how Riker contrasts the harsh reality of the Chilean miners with controlled academic environments. He looks at disaster response simulations run at Harvard University. According to the data Riker presents, when researchers ran mixed-gender crisis teams to these complex simulations, those teams took 40% longer to reach critical decisions compared to the all-male hierarchical teams.
Wait, 40% longer. In a life or death crisis simulation, taking almost half again as long to make a decision is a massive liability. Why the delay?
Riker argues the delay happens because the decision-making process becomes bogged down in collaborative processing. Instead of executing cold, hard facts through a chain of command, the mixed teams spent time debating, ensuring everyone felt heard, and managing interpersonal emotional dynamics. Riker claims that under existential pressure, hierarchical male groups deliver results, whereas the introduction of what he terms female social dynamics fundamentally slows down life or death execution.
And this brings us right to the core of the frustration so many of you listening might be feeling at work or even in your personal relationships. Riker calls this phenomenon the masculinity paradox, or the misandrist double bind. It is this lose-lose scenario where modern men are completely trapped. I was looking at the data he provides on this, and it is honestly staggering to see it quantified. Look at the Detroit police data.
Yes, the Detroit Police Survey is a very clear example of this paradox in action.
Right. 84% of male officers reported facing professional discipline in a completely contradictory way. On one hand, they were punished or formally reprimanded for showing emotion, like breaking down or crying at a horrific crime scene. They were told they lacked the stoicism required for the job. But on the exact same token, these men were also punished for enforcing city curfews too firmly, or for taking physical command of a chaotic street situation.
And in those cases, they were labeled aggressive or toxic.
Exactly. It is the ultimate damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario.
And Riker points out that this is not just limited to law enforcement. It translates directly to the pristine environments of the corporate world. He brings in data from the Harvard Business School showing how this double bind affects white-collar professionals.
How so? What happens to a corporate executive who tries to follow society's advice to be more vulnerable?
According to the data, male executives who openly discussed their personal struggles or showed vulnerability in the workplace were 40% less likely to be promoted over a 3-year tracking period. Their peers who framed challenges stoically and never complained moved up the ladder. However, the trap springs on the other side as well. If those same dominant stoic men hit a dip in their quarterly profits, they faced termination at a much higher rate. They weren't given grace, they were suddenly labeled as toxic or uncollaborative.
It is a massive contradiction. Society is demanding the brilliant, unflinching competence of a Don Draper from Mad Men. You are expected to be the rock, the provider. But at the same time, the culture only really applauds the bumbling, harmless, endlessly accommodating nature of a Homer Simpson. You have to be as hard as steel, but apologize for having sharp edges.
And Riker points out that this cultural demand actually contradicts female biological preference as well. which only adds to the dissonance men experience.
Really? How does he measure female biological preference versus what the culture is demanding?
He references massive data dumps from dating platforms like OkCupid, alongside evolutionary psychology statistics on waist-to-hip ratios and facial symmetry. The data consistently shows that, regardless of what is culturally popular at the moment, women are biologically hardwired to prefer dominant, assertive, high-resource providing partners. Yet the dominant cultural narrative actively demonizes the exact assertive traits required to actually become that high-level provider.
Which creates a society of deeply frustrated men and secretly disappointed women.
According to Riker, yes.
So, if this biological wiring is so foundational, surely the institutions that rely purely on objective performance reflect that in their data, right? I mean, you can't fake results on a battlefield or a trading floor.
Exactly. The military and corporate data he provides is quite uncompromising. He points to extensive trials conducted by the United States Marine Corps at Camp Pendleton. They ran thousands of combat drills comparing different unit compositions.
What did they find?
They found that all male infantry units solved complex tactical problems 22% faster than mixed gender units. Furthermore, Riker cites combat data from the Battle of Fallujah, showing that all male units experienced 52% fewer friendly fire incidents.
52% fewer friendly fire incidents is a massive difference. How does Riker explain that disparity?
He argues it comes down to biological focus. In an all-male unit, he claims, there is no biological distraction. There are no subconscious mating displays, no protective instincts overriding tactical logic, and no interpersonal social maneuvering. There is just pure, hierarchical execution of the mission.
And he says this exact same dynamic plays out on Wall Street.
Precisely. On Wall Street, he points to an internal study conducted at Goldman Sachs. They looked at the hormonal profiles of the top traders. The data showed that traders with naturally higher baseline testosterone levels closed complex financial deals 17% faster and generated 19% higher profitability for the firm.
Wait, higher testosterone directly correlated to higher profit margins? What is the mechanism there?
Because testosterone fundamentally alters how a man processes risk. Men with higher testosterone don't hesitate or seek consensus during volatile market swings. They make decisive, aggressive calls. Riker's core argument is that testosterone is essentially the venture capital rocket fuel of human civilization. If a society or an institution systematically suppresses it, they are starving themselves of innovation and efficiency.
So we have this intense biological foundation. Biology is reality, according to the Riker. The question for you, the listener, is how do you actually manifest this control? If the system is trying to suppress these traits, how does a man physically signal his authority without tripping the HR alarms? That transitions us right into the second section of the book, which covers the anatomy of authority, the physical, vocal, and aesthetic hacks Riker advocates. Let's start with something incredibly basic. Let's talk about posture.
Posture is fascinating because most of us are taught it as a matter of etiquette. Sit up straight, don't slouch. But Riker says posture has absolutely nothing to do with being polite. He argues it is literal, undeniable biological signaling.
Right. I was reading the section on the UCLA study he cites, and this blew my mind. They strapped biometric sensors to people and had them simply stand upright in a room. Just the act of standing with a straight spine triggered a 40% higher testosterone surge in the observers who were looking at them. Observers literally had a hormonal reaction to someone else's posture.
Riker calls your spine a dominance antenna. He makes a direct comparison to the animal kingdom here. He likens a straight, rigid spine to a silverback gorilla thumping his chest and standing tall to shield his troop. In the primate world, that posture signals protection, competence, and a latent capacity for violence if provoked. It demands respect on a subconscious level.
But does this actually translate to a modern work environment? Can you just change the way you stand and trick the biology of people around you?
Roker provides an incredible real-world application to prove that it does. He looks at what he calls the Spartan unit fix. There were these massive Australian iron mining operations dealing with severe accident issues, highly dangerous environment, heavy machinery, extreme fatigue. The corporate response was usually more safety videos or consensus meetings. But one management team took a biological approach.
What did they do?
They strictly enforced what they called no stoop zones across the entire facility. Mining crews had to stand military straight at all times, even during their break periods. No leaning against walls, no slouching over tables. The result was that industrial accidents were cut by 40% within a single quarter.
Just from forcing them to stand up straight, how does Riker explain that?
Forcing that physical posture forces focus and discipline on a neurological level. It prevents the brain from slipping into a passive, lethargic state. You are mechanically forcing the body to stay in an alert, dominant operational mode.
That makes a lot of sense. And it isn't just about how you stand, it's about how you sound. Riker points to a study out of Duke University that tracked the vocal pitch of corporate executives. They found that male CEOs with deeper voices earned, on average, $540,000 more over the course of their careers than their peers with higher pitched voices.
The psychology behind that is deeply primal. Low-frequency sounds in nature trigger primal associations with massive physical size and potential threat. Think of the rumble of a lion or the low growl of thunder. It is so deeply wired into the human brain that we automatically defer to it. Riker notes that female news anchors, who naturally have higher voices, will intentionally train themselves to drop their vocal pitch by roughly 30 hertz right before they deliver a crisis report. They know the audience will unconsciously view the lower pitch as more authoritative.
But it's not just about deepening your voice, right? It's also about knowing when to shut up entirely. I was surprised by how much importance Riker places on silence and spatial dominance.
Yes, the absence of action is often more powerful than the action itself. He gives a very specific hack for everyday life with elevators. Riker advises that you should always aim to enter an elevator last and exit it first. And when you are inside, you stand dead center.
Wait, enter last, exit first, and stand in the middle. That just sounds like you were being annoying.
It might seem that way, but by entering last and exiting first, you are physically controlling the flow of movement. You're managing the entry and exit points. By standing dead center, you force other people to unconsciously orbit around you. It is a micro-dominance display. You force them to yield physical space to you, which conditions them to yield to you in other areas.
That is wild. And how does silence play into this?
Riker points to FBI hostage negotiation tactics. The data shows that 90% of successful hostage resolutions involve the lead negotiator speaking less than 30% of the time.
Less than 30%. You would think a negotiator would be doing all the talking to convince the guy to put the gun down.
Exactly the opposite. Riker explains that the human brain actually begins to panic after just 4 seconds of uninterrupted silence in a social interaction. It feels incredibly unnatural to us. So Riker says you should weaponize this biological discomfort in your negotiations. If you state your terms, you stop talking. You stare mutely. Let the other person talk themselves into a corner simply because their brain is desperately trying to fill that awkward void.
Okay, so we've covered posture, pitch, and silence. But what about the physical armor you put on every day? Does he really believe that what you wear changes your biological signaling? I mean, Mark Zuckerberg wears a gray t-shirt every day.
Riker acknowledges the tech billionaire casual trend, but he argues that for the vast majority of men operating in traditional power structures, wardrobe weaponization is a very real, silent language of power.
I have to admit, his fashion rules are absolutely brutal. He says you must wear 100% wool suits. He explicitly forbids polyester blends. And he points to a study done at a London auction house that used infrared thermal cameras to monitor the bidders.
This is one of the most fascinating data points. The cameras showed that the men bidding in 100% wool suits maintained significantly lower core body temperatures. They were literally running cooler under the immense stress of a $1 million bidding war. Meanwhile, the guys wearing polyester blends were trapping their body heat. The cameras showed them physically radiating heat and sweating through their bluff bids. The end result was the wool wearers outbid the polyester wearers by 40% because they were physically more comfortable and could maintain their poker face longer.
It is about biological regulation as much as aesthetics. He has other strict rules too. He states you should never wear brown shoes with a blue suit after 6 p.m.
Riker argues it signals a lack of elite situational awareness. He extends this to the courtroom as well, citing a Cornell University study that analyzed juror reactions to defense attorneys. Jurors consistently rated lawyers wearing traditional Oxfords as significantly more credible than those wearing loafers.
Why would a juror care about shoelaces?
Subconscious signaling. The stitched sole and the laces of an Oxford signal permanence and groundedness. A slip-on loafer subconsciously signals that the person might be impermanent or ready to run away. The lawyers in Oxfords won 12% more cases than their peers in loafers.
And it goes all the way down to color and smell. Goldman Sachs analyzed over 200,000 of their internal client meetings. Men wearing charcoal gray suits closed their financial deals 19% faster than men wearing black suits. Riker says charcoal whispers deep institutional competence, whereas a solid black suit screams nightclub bouncer. And for scent, men wearing a vetiver-based cologne were rated 42% more competent. But if they wore a vanilla-based scent, their competence ratings plummeted because vanilla is associated with baking and maternal comfort.
It is all about projecting an impenetrable, biologically optimized armor of competence. But what happens when that armor gets pierced? What happens when you inevitably fail?
Right, because everyone fails.
Exactly. Here's where it gets really interesting. Riker introduces weakness conversion frameworks, detailing exactly how historical billionaires process failure.
The modern advice is to sit with your feelings. Maybe talk to a therapist. Riker says forget all of that vulnerability nonsense. He says processing failure should be purely mechanical. Look at the John D. Rockefeller method. When Rockefeller faced a massive business failure, he didn't suppress his emotions, but he put a strict mechanical timer on them. He gave himself exactly 17 minutes to feel self-pity. He timed it on his pocket watch. When the 17 minutes were up, he wrote every single mistake down on a piece of paper, burned the paper in his fireplace, and then went out and bought 2 identical brand new suits.
Buying the suits is the key psychological trigger. Riker argues that by physically stepping into a new set of clothes, Rockefeller was stepping into a new, upgraded version of himself. Emotional processing is a massive liability if it isn't strictly time-boxed. He brings up Andrew Carnegie's whiskey discipline to illustrate how this works on a team level.
The whiskey discipline. Set the scene for us.
Imagine a brutal 19th century steel mill in Pittsburgh. Dangerous hot work. If a team of steel workers missed their production quota for the week, the floor foreman didn't host a therapy session. He took a heavy iron axe, walked into the workers' break room, and smashed the company whiskey barrel right in front of them.
Just smashed it.
Just smashed it. The whiskey flooded the floor. It created an immediate sensory consequence. The workers had to spend the rest of their shift smelling the cheap bourbon and slipping in it. It was a demonstration of ruthless leadership. And production on that specific floor always jumped 20% on the very next shift.
I want to talk about Cornelius Vanderbilt's debt shovel because this one is honestly pretty shocking. Vanderbilt's nephew comes to him, drowning in gambling debts, begging for a bailout. The modern instinct would be to pay off the debt and send the kid to rehab. Vanderbilt doesn't give him a single dime. Instead, he hands the kid a wooden-handled shovel, marches him out to the family estate, and makes him dig a 200-foot trench, paying him the exact daily wage of an uneducated day laborer until the debt is paid off.
Riker argues that this brutal physical consequence is the only way to build actual resilience. A bailout builds dependency. The shovel builds character. Riker attempts to quantify this mindset using the Adversity Capital Index. Researchers tracked men who actively reframed their professional rejections purely as mechanical data points rather than personal moral failings. By treating failure as adversity capital, these men increased their baseline income by 37% compared to peers who internalized the failure.
Converting weakness into strength requires mental discipline, but Riker argues it also requires a complete mastery of your environment. You can't be resilient if your enemies know exactly where your weak points are. And that brings us to information asymmetry.
Information asymmetry is perhaps the most paranoid but essential concept in the book. Riker argues that true power lies entirely in what you conceal. He looks at the Venetian Republic's Council of Ten. In 1471, the Council of Ten executed 3 of their own top data analysts because the analysts had falsified grain shortage projections to benefit their own trading houses. They understood that asymmetric information held by the wrong people is a lethal threat to state power. They didn't fire them, they executed them.
Fast forward to today. We aren't executing data analysts, but Riker says your digital footprint is the modern equivalent of that vulnerability. He claims that in a corporate war, your enemies will absolutely use your digital exhaust against you.
His solution is extreme modern operational hygiene. He says your standard iPhone and Gmail accounts are massive liabilities.
He gets very specific about this, using the Signal app with disappearing messages, buying burner phones with physical cache, and for truly sensitive documents, using an air-gapped laptop that has its Wi-Fi card physically removed.
It sounds like pure paranoia until you read the examples he gives.
Like the executive who tried to blame hackers. This guy was under investigation for sending market-manipulating emails. He claimed his home network was hacked, but the investigators pulled the Microsoft authentication logs. The logs proved the login came from his home IP address at 2:17 a.m. And worse, it was time-stamped with his smart TV logs, which showed he was sitting in his living room streaming the movie Die Hard at the exact moment the email was sent. He went to prison because of his television.
Riker warns that physical paper trails are just as dangerous. Look at the recent collapse of FTX. When federal investigators built their massive fraud case against Sam Bankman-Fried, a huge piece of their case was built using handwritten meeting notes scribbled by a paralegal. On one of the legal pads, Bankman-Fried had literally written the words "may be illegal" and circled it. That piece of paper destroyed a billion-dollar empire.
So what is Riker's solution for when you actually have to write things down?
He suggests writing on thermal paper, using UV reactive ink, and holding these meetings in a steam sauna because the intense humidity naturally destroys the thermal paper, leaving zero physical evidence.
I mean, trying to set up a sauna meeting with an air-gapped laptop sounds a little absurd for the average guy, but the principle makes sense. And it isn't just about hiding information from enemies. Riker talks about strategically withholding information from your own team.
Yes, strategic withholding. Riker uses the Cuban Missile Crisis to illustrate this. President John F. Kennedy had access to highly detailed aerial reconnaissance photos of the Soviet missile sites in Cuba, but he deliberately withheld the highest resolution photos from his lower-level cabinet officials.
Why would the president hide intelligence from his own military advisors?
Kennedy understood human nature. If he gave a room full of generals perfect information, they would spend hours debating the exact angle of the missile silos and getting bogged down in analysis paralysis. By giving them incomplete information, he forced a sharper, more focused decision-making chain.
And modern tech CEOs replicate this exact strategy. One prominent CEO intentionally gives his middle managers only 70% of the total project details. By keeping them slightly in the dark, he cuts their internal debate time by 30%. They have no choice but to execute the 70% they do know.
If you control the flow of information, you control the behavior of the people. And Riker argues that you exert this control most directly through command language.
Command language. The linguistics of the battlefield applied to your daily emails. He analyzes the punctuation in our text messages. He says that if you end a text message with a hard period, it lowers your reply rate by 19%. Digital natives subconsciously read a hard period at the end of a short message as passive-aggressive hostility.
He also advises ruthlessly stripping the word please from your corporate vocabulary.
Right. He says you should never use please in a directive email because please makes it sound like you are making a request, giving the recipient the illusion that they have the option to say no.
But you can't just bark orders without sounding like a tyrant. How do you balance that?
You balance it by adding objective financial data to justify the command. Instead of saying, please finish the Q3 report by Friday, you change the language. You say, close the Q3 report by Friday. Processing delays are currently costing the division $2 million weekly. You act as the objective savior of the bottom line.
Riker also tackles the physical dynamics of conversation, specifically interruption. UCLA did a massive research study observing mixed-gender corporate meetings. They found that men yield the floor to an interjecting female colleague 68% more often than they yield to an interjecting male colleague.
So what is his advice for a man who wants to retain dominance without being perceived as aggressively shouting someone down?
Riker's advice is entirely physical and tonal. He says, do not raise your voice. Raising your voice signals a loss of emotional control. Instead, if someone tries to talk over you, you simply raise a flat, open palm toward them, lock direct eye contact, and say in a flat, low-pitched tone, stop, my turn. He argues this triggers an ancestral submission response in the interrupter's brain.
He also drops a great tactical hack for email dominance, the 3.1 City AM email. MIT data shows that corporate emails sent between 3 and 4 in the morning get opened 42% more often than emails sent at 9 a.m.
It creates an aura of intimidation. When a subordinate sees an email timestamped at 3:17 a.m., they wonder if you never sleep, or if you are simply an unstoppable machine. If we connect this to the bigger picture, how does this scale up? Riker transitions to political war rooms. He argues that the most successful political campaigns operate exactly like ruthless military units.
He points to the 1992 Bill Clinton campaign. They had an opposition research team called the Manhattan Project.
Speed and overwhelming information superiority. When the Bush administration attacked Clinton, this team cross-referenced 20,000 pages of dense Bush administration tax documents in under 72 hours. They found every broken no new taxes pledge Bush had ever made and flooded the media with it before the Bush team could respond.
Ronald Reagan's team did the exact same thing in the 80s. They literally ran assassination drills to prepare Reagan for his debate ambushes against Jimmy Carter. They calculated Carter's exact blink rate under severe stress. They found that when Carter felt cornered, he blinked exactly 22 times per minute. Reagan's team told him to watch Carter's eyes, and the second Carter hit that rapid blink rate, Reagan would launch his perfectly timed interruptions. Calculated psychological warfare.
In the modern era, that warfare has moved entirely into the digital realm. Cyber swarm tactics. He recounts a story of a 19-year-old anarchist named Loki. Loki orchestrated a distributed denial-of-service attack that completely paralyzed 3 major municipal government websites simultaneously.
And he didn't use supercomputers. His botnet was made up of 12,000 compromised smart refrigerators. He hijacked home appliances and turned them into a digital army.
Overwhelming force no longer requires billions of dollars. It just requires exploiting decentralized vulnerabilities. Look at the Waze rebellion in Mexico City.
Local cartels manipulated the Waze navigation app by having hundreds of operatives report fake accidents simultaneously. They artificially created phantom 20-mile traffic jams on the map. The algorithm rerouted thousands of civilians into these gridlocks, physically blocking federal troops from moving through the city to raid cartels' safe houses.
Dealing with fast, asymmetrical threats requires crisis command. Riker points to Ernest Shackleton's Antarctic expedition. His ship, the Endurance, gets trapped and crushed by the ice. Winter is setting in, supplies are limited. Shackleton did not seek consensus. He ordered the immediate shooting of the expedition's sled dogs to conserve seal meat and forced his freezing crew into grueling marches across the ice.
It was dictatorial, but they survived. And Riker maps this onto modern corporate business, like American Airlines in the 80s. When Braniff Airlines started eating into Americans' market share on the Dallas to Chicago route, American dropped their fares to an absurd, money-losing $49.
They bled Braniff dry, forcing the smaller airline into bankruptcy. Once Braniff was dead, American immediately raised the prices back up. Corporate homicide dressed up as a consumer discount. You have to have the Shackleton crisis command mentality.
So we have covered the biological imperatives, physical presence, psychological processing, command language, and the war room mentality. This leads us to the macro thesis of the book, Institutional Conquest. Riker claims the whole system is rigged against the average guy.
He dismantles what he calls the illusion of labor. He traces the architecture of control back to the medieval ironworker guilds. They hoarded their metallurgy techniques like state secrets and created artificial barriers to entry so outsiders could never compete.
And Riker says modern tech companies do the exact same thing. Cisco charges IT professionals upwards of $2,500 just to take a certification exam. Riker argues this is pure gatekeeping, a modern guild extracting a toll from the working class.
And for the gig economy, the cage is tighter. An Uber driver isn't fighting a human fleet manager, they are fighting an algorithm. If a driver strikes, the algorithm simply surges pricing, incentivizes a replacement driver, and replaces the striking worker in 90 seconds.
But what about at the very top? Riker introduces parasitic encapsulation. Imagine Burger King and McDonald's fighting a brutal marketing war. But hovering above them is a massive asset management firm, like a BlackRock or Vanguard. That asset manager buys a controlling percentage of the shares in both companies. A&D buys the corporate debt of both companies.
When you bankroll both sides of the market, you veto the concept of competition. The wealth flows upward to the encapsulating parasite regardless of who loses on the ground.
If the system is that deeply rigged, how does an individual actually influence it? Riker says traditional lobbying in D.C. is basically a joke. Brookings Institution data shows that paying $10,000 an hour for a dinner with a U.S. senator only yields a 20% success rate.
A Harvard Business Review analysis shows that massive corporations spending over $5 million annually on traditional lobbying actually see a negative return on investment over a 10-year period. You are paying for access theater.
If lobbying is dead, what is the alternative? Riker argues real power is executed through the dumpster deal. Moving $50 million in capital with a single, well-timed text message sent through a highly trusted back channel. And to execute that, you need network density mapping.
You sit down, list every person in your orbit, and score them from 1 to 10 on their value creation potential versus your dependency risk. You want a network with high value creation and extremely low dependency. If someone scores high on dependency, you cut them out.
Then you engage in conflict capitalization. Riker says you should never moralize conflict, you should strictly monetize it. Look at the warlords in the Congo. They weaponized ancient tribal conflicts to seize control of the rare earth mineral rights, turning localized violence into a $12 billion coltan mining industry that supplies smartphone batteries.
Or the Brexit vote. Hedge funds didn't cause the crisis. But when false reports leaked suggesting negotiations were breaking down, these funds immediately shorted the British pound and made £400 million overnight. Social media algorithms do this every day. Divisive, anger-inducing posts generate 12 times more ad revenue than harmless content. Conflict is an unlicensed currency.
Which brings us to rivalry machinery and strategic betrayal. Riker says rivalry is high-level chess. He uses Alexander the Great and Hephaestion. When the Persian emperor offered Alexander half his kingdom and his daughter's hand to stop fighting, Alexander looked at Hephaestion. Hephaestion said, "If I were Alexander, I would accept." Alexander replied, "So would I if I were Hephaestion." But they both knew they wanted the entire world.
When you don't have that alignment and you face a rival, Riker outlines adversarial appropriation. You redirect their force to your own benefit. When illegal movie piracy sites popped up, Blockbuster spent millions aggressively suing them. Netflix didn't join the legal battle. They looked at the piracy data, licensed that exact content, and built a legal streaming platform.
Look at Apple and Samsung. Steve Jobs declared thermonuclear patent war on Samsung over Android. But while Apple's lawyers were at Samsung's throat in the courtroom, Apple's supply chain executives were quietly signing contracts to buy 12 million high-resolution iPhone displays from Samsung every single year. You choke your competitor in public while making them entirely dependent on your business.
Sometimes you have to amputate a relationship with the poison pill, or scorched earth strategic separation. Churchill had a massive internal rival in Lord Halifax, who was conducting secret peace talks with Hitler. Churchill didn't just fire him. He leaked the story to the press to destroy Halifax's reputation, and then had MI5 physically lose his passport so he couldn't travel.
Elon Musk did a modern version of this during the COVID lockdowns. When local officials told him he couldn't reopen his Tesla factory, Musk decided to reopen anyway. Several top executives opposed him. He sent out a mass firing email that said, "Your access badges are now decorative."
Riker references the ancient Romans to explain this ruthlessness. When Romans conquered a desert city, their engineers would rebuild the aqueducts to intentionally choke the water supply. They calculated exactly how much water the population needed to barely survive, so they couldn't stockpile resources or mount a rebellion. You keep your adversaries alive, but permanently on their knees.
Riker's golden rule is mercy towards saboteurs is cruelty to the loyal. John D. Rockefeller weaponized opponents' logistics perfectly. To bankrupt competing oil pipelines, he didn't attack the pipelines directly. He secretly bought up all the independent oak stave factories in the region. Within weeks, his competitors realized they literally couldn't build the barrels required to store their own oil.
This raises an important question. How do men like Rockefeller ensure their power outlives them? Legacy engineering and permanent advantage systems. Riker argues legacy is a manufactured product. In 1915, Rockefeller was the most despised man in America. He hired PR pioneer Ivy Lee for $2,500 a month.
Ivy Lee flooded the press with photos of Rockefeller handing out dimes to poor children. Riker breaks legacy engineering into 3 phases. Suppression, using legal threats to bury negative facts. Saturation, flooding the media with positive PR. And fabrication, creating heroic narratives out of thin air. Like the corporate client who paid $30,000 for a ghost-written memoir that falsely placed him with the Apollo astronauts.
Riker even exposes the geopolitics behind the Nobel Prize. The Peace Prize Committee specifically schedules their global winner announcements to intentionally overshadow United Nations Security Council meetings, asserting European moral authority over UN political authority.
The 2002 Nobel Prize in Chemistry was split 3 ways. Leaked emails showed American committee members heavily lobbied to dilute the recognition of an Asian scientist to maintain a Western scientific dominance narrative.
The Nobel Economics Prize has direct financial consequences. The year Paul Krugman won, Goldman Sachs had already taken billion-dollar short positions based on leaked committee chatter weeks before the announcement. It literally moves global financial markets.
Riker says true legacy is designing self-replicating systems. He contrasts Roman aqueducts, still delivering water 2,000 years later, with modern city pipes that fail after a decade. The Rothschilds didn't just hoard gold. They set up 5 interconnected banks and a proprietary network of carrier pigeons that beat the British government to the news of Waterloo by a full day.
Ray Kroc sold the McDonald's Operations Manual, a system so perfectly idiot-proof it survives economic crashes. Bezos coded a living organism through Amazon's 14 leadership principles, programming managers to automatically optimize workflows. The ultimate goal is reaching a Nash equilibrium.
Explain what a Nash equilibrium is for the audience.
A Nash equilibrium is a stable state where no single player can benefit by changing their strategy, as long as all other players keep their strategies unchanged. You rig the game so perfectly that your opponents are forced to play by your rules. Elon Musk achieved this with the Tesla headquarters move. He threatened to leave California, triggering a massive bidding war among 10 states. Texas won, saving Tesla over $400 million. He forced the political system to pay him to exist.
It is a staggering, cold, and purely mechanical view of the world.
We spent this hour exploring Riker's biological imperatives, his tactical frameworks, and his architecture for institutional conquest. Here is the provocative thought for you to mull over. Whether you view these systems of power as a tyrannical conspiracy designed to oppress, or as the harsh necessities of evolutionary biology, the mechanics of power operate exactly the same way. A steel gear turns another steel gear regardless of your personal morality. The question isn't whether a game is fair. The real question is, are you doing the hard work to become the architect of your own system, or are you just going to remain a passive resource, blindly managed by someone else's algorithms?
That's a very heavy, very real question to walk away with today. Before you go, remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the show so we can keep bringing you these intense, unfiltered breakdowns. Today's deep dive covered the highly controversial ebook Political Science, Understanding Politics and Personal Power. To dive into the raw source material yourself, check out Amazon, Kindle, and Google Play Books to buy the book, and be sure to follow the author, @ConradRiker, on Substack for more of his ongoing insights. Until next time, stay sharp, question the narrative, and keep building your system.